subjects in Oxbridge. So I'm going to just move my slides. So if you could join on menti.com either by using the QR code or entering the code of the meeting, I think the meeting code will always be on the top as well in case you get kicked out or want to rejoin. You should be able to also interact with this presentation and ask me questions throughout. Yeah, so please join and participate. So I'm just going to briefly tell you a bit about my own application journey and getting into Oxbridge. So like I said, after my IB in Italy, I did a biomedical sciences degree in Edinburgh. This is the first time I had to write my personal statement. And I think I got into all the universities I applied to. Then during my degree, I decided I wanted to study medicine actually, and I decided to apply. So I applied during the final year of my degree, so a bit like you do during the final year of school. So I applied to some graduate and some undergraduate medical courses. Unfortunately, after the interviews, I didn't get anywhere, so I had to take a gap year, or more of an adult gap year, and do a whole year of polishing up my application and working in healthcare as well to get that work experience. And then I applied again. So I applied to Cambridge graduate medicine course twice, actually, both years. The first time I didn't get in after the interview, and then the second time I got the interview again. So the only thing that really changed from my application was my personal statement slightly and my interview performance. And yeah, so I got in, and now I'm in my final year. So overall, I wrote the personal statement 3 times actually, and I did my Cambridge interview twice. So yeah, so give us some answers if you're able on Menti. You can see the code above as to what you know about personal statements. So we can maybe talk about different truths and myths, and yeah, see what you guys think about it. I'm going to give it a few minutes. Okay, so I see some really good thoughts here already. Good descriptions as well. So things like personal, honest, concise, reflective. All of these are really good descriptions as to what a personal statement should be like as a description. Yeah, then things to focus on. Sorry, it's moving so much. I'm losing my focus on it. So yeah, talking about experience, your extracurriculars. Someone mentioned, I think, somewhere 90% academic. That could be both a truth and a myth, depending again on where you're applying. Of course, if you have a lot of academic experience and that's what you want to highlight and that's what you're able to reflect the most, then it can be. It doesn't have to be 90% academic at all. Yeah, it says also separate the top students. I think this is quite important, especially when talking about Oxbridge, because Oxbridge receives so many applications every year. And the only way to separate the students and to find the right students for each course is to, well, first of all, take the most academically able students. That's why they look at your grades, your predicted grades, but also do separate admissions tests. But then also finding the people who are most passionate about the area they are applying to. And I know it can be challenging when you're still at school and you don't know if you're passionate about that subject, but just showing why you would be the right person to do it can separate those top students that have the highest grades and the highest test results. So thank you so much for your thoughts. I'm just going to move on now. So you might know some of the information about it already, but it has 4,000 character limit. I think that's including spaces and things like gaps between paragraphs. It's a chance to show yourself off. So it's in the name. It's very personal. It has to be about specifically you and your ideas and passions. It's a very important aspect of the application process, and it gives you an opportunity to talk about yourself, your passions, and your and things outside your grades. There are some myths about some universities, especially for subjects like non-medicine subjects, not reading personal statements. It can appear like that sometimes. I remember one of my offers I received something like the next day after I applied. And it did feel a bit like, did they even read my personal statement? But like I said, universities like Oxbridge, and especially the more competitive programs, so some of the sciences, things like engineering, medicine, they receive so many applicants that they must read personal statements in order to be able to choose those most suitable students to then interview. So let's have a closer look at the personal statement. If you can have a read of this personal statement, I'm going to give you a couple of minutes. So you can see different aspects of personal statement here to start with. You have, obviously, this is not the whole personal statement. This is maybe a third or a half, I would say, from seeing the amount that's written. You have an introduction that first describes why the student decided to study biochemistry. Then you have a short paragraph on academic aspects of it, and then a short paragraph on work experience aspects of it. So that's just a brief introduction. So what do you think about this personal statement? Let me just see. Can you write your thoughts in this quiz, what you like about it, what you would like to change about it? So give me your thoughts. And there are no correct answers, actually. Just take your time to write your thoughts. So I think we're getting some answers. Thank you so much for all your contributions. Okay, so let's have a look about what people have said. Stating the subject isn't necessary, more formal style of writing, more detailed, not detailed enough, more specific, needs to be more reflective, over descriptive. Don't say since I was a child. That's an interesting comment. more in depth, take out unnecessary words, reflection again, academic side of it. Talk about what they've done outside of school. The beginning looks cliche, more humor, more professional language, more specific, less waffling, details. Exactly. Thank you so much for all your comments. So these are kind of the challenges, and you've highlighted most of these important challenges when writing the personal statement. You need to stick to the 4,000 limit, 4,000 character limit, which means that you need to make every word count. And also because it is a personal statement, and this is the only piece of work in your application that will differ from everyone else's, and that's unique to you. You need to give specific examples and go beyond the curriculum. So especially when applying to top universities and top programs, this is quite important, that this kind of going above and beyond your school level, to be honest. And another thing is, people mentioned it being a bit too waffly and not enough detail and not reading well. When you've written your personal statement, it's important to read it out loud. So does it read well? And you can do that many times, and especially before submitting. I would even say, I was told that to do with every piece of work I've ever written, even things like essays and things like that. Print it out on paper, because on paper you get a different perspective than looking at it on the computer, and read it out loud, because that's when you notice the main things like spelling mistakes or any kind of punctuation mistakes. And then you notice if, for example, you've written the sentence completely incorrectly. Print it out, read it out, and keep editing it. Okay, so I think you should be able to write some comments here again if we start talking about the interviews. We are going to come back to questions about personal statements at the end. Give me some thoughts about what you know so far about the interviews, because this is your next part of the application that is very personal to you compared to the rest, to things like grades and test results. So I'm going to give it another half a minute. Okay, so we got to over 30 answers. Thank you guys for your contributions. Just going to show stressful MMIs. Want to understand the thinking process, academic questions. Pretty much everyone gets one for Cambridge Maths. I have no idea about that, sorry. Multiple mini, more academic questions, very difficult questions, panel interviews, more academically based, science focused, two-way discussion. Yeah, so all these thoughts, I would say, are more or less correct. Experiment statistics, interpreting data, not everyone gets an interview. It's personal to you. They're trying to keep you on your toes. Yeah, thank you. Problem solving. Exactly. So that all is correct. So basically the interview is designed to assess your academic potential. Tutors are looking at self-motivation, enthusiasm. In terms of the format, so some people have written MMIs, some people wrote panel interviews. So if you don't know what that is, panel interviews, where you're sat in front of a panel of interviewers and you're just talking for something like 15 to 30 minutes. It can be different formats. Multiple mini interviews are the interviews where you have many stations where, for example, you have one or two interviewers in each. and every 5 to 10 minutes you rotate between different stations. So in Oxbridge, there's a variety of both, I would say. I think panel interviews, to be honest, are more common from most people that I've spoken to. They've had 2 to 3 panel interviews. So a discussion with a couple of interviewers that is 20 to 30 minutes long. And I personally had multiple mini interviews. That's quite unique for graduate medicine course. But I wouldn't be surprised if other subjects do multiple mini interviews as well. And exactly, so you're given usually things like some different problems to solve or data to interpret. And talking about it being stressful or very difficult, that is, I think, what a lot of people experience. And that is completely normal, because one of the main points of the interview is to simulate an Oxbridge supervision scenario. So most of you might know Oxbridge teaching is based on supervisions. I think they're called tutorials in Oxford. So it's small group teaching where you have maybe 2 to 3 students and one professor, and you're talking about the subject of that week, for example. You sometimes have some work to submit beforehand, and you might be talking about your work. But yeah, the interviews are kind of their taster to test you in this sort of supervision scenario. So to see how, if you're able to sit and discuss a topic of your and the professor's interest for an extended amount of time, and also how you deal with things like failure, so or being unable to answer questions, and how far your kind of thinking and knowledge reaches as well. So that's why some of you have written that it's important to show your thinking. And it is stressful probably because in all interviews, you will reach a point where you can't answer the interviewer's questions anymore. And it can be intimidating and challenging, especially if you're a top student and you're used to answering all the questions at school correctly. But so yeah, that I think most people find stressful, but all of it is both a test to test your limits of knowledge, but also to see how you deal in a situation where you can't answer the question anymore. So it is quite a unique experience of your application. So just briefly, how can Oxbridge Mind help you to prepare for those aspects? So we do interview tutoring for both entry exams, personal statement interviews, that is personalized and tailored to you. I do that a lot. We do both. So with personal statements, it's both preparing to write it and looking over your drafts. To all my students, I recommend to write more than one draft, and to do a lot of brainstorming before even starting to write. For the interviews, we do both the interview material tutoring, but also mock interviews. Once you're ready for that, we can also just do mock interviews if that's what you're looking for. And I think throughout the year, there's also events where you can have where there's group interviews as well, and things like multiple mini interview simulations. And that's some of the feedback from our previous customers. Yeah, so these are the links to our services in terms of the interviews and personal statements. And there's some more information about admissions tests on the link below. I can come back to that. And there's also some free resources. So if you just go to oxbridgemind.co.uk, there's both information as to how to apply, a tool to compare different colleges, because that's another challenging aspect of applying to Oxbridge, picking your college when you're applying. And there's also our YouTube channel with some video resources. Yeah, this is our interface. So besides Oxbridge Mind, there's also Study Mind, which supports you through studying for A levels. So both A levels and GCSEs. We also do tutoring for for these subjects. So I'm going to take any questions from the audience now. Feel free to ask anything. If you can, please make your questions quite wide so that it would be applicable to most of the audience, because there's 90 of you, so I wouldn't be able to answer everyone's individual questions. What subjects did you do in the IB? I did a higher level. So in IB, we do 6 subjects, unlike in A levels. I did biology, chemistry, and English as my second language at higher levels, and at standard levels, I did maths, world arts and cultures was my humanity, and Lithuanian language, which was my literature language, and Italian as my extra subject. Oh, sorry. Should still be able to. In interviews, I ask academic questions more questions about yourself. In Oxbridge, I would say academic more. Things about your motivation and passion for the subject come more from the personal statement. Even the personal questions are somehow partially academic, because they might ask, for example, a piece of work you've recently read that in that area that has caught your attention or something like that. So that might be that even the personal questions would be related to the subject. Okay. How can we prepare effectively for the interview? There's a lot of online resources, both free and certain ones that you can pay for. I bought a book for medical school interviews specifically, which was very useful. You can get some tutoring support. You can also get support from any friends and family. So if you find those questions online or in books that do come up in the interviews, you can just talk out loud in front of your friends and family, because a lot of the times people, before coming to interviews, that was my mistake the first time I applied for medicine, I didn't get in. I thought I had all my thoughts in my head. I'm going to speak from my heart, and I have a lot of good things to say. But once I had to speak in a stressful situation, it didn't come out as nicely as I thought it would. So even when you think you know all the answers to everything, it's still good to practice out loud, even in front of the mirror. So I think, a lot of practice. And for science Oxbridge interviews, again, it's a bit more challenging because a lot of it is things like problem solving. Again, I would suggest maybe asking for some support from your school teachers. So maybe having a 20-minute chat once a week about a problem that they can give you unexpectedly. That's something that you've not seen before. So a lot of practice. How much detail do you go into for the personal statement? Well, it depends what detail you mean. I think it's not so much the detail, but the reflection that matters. So I always also say not quantity, but quality. It doesn't matter if you list all of your achievements, all the prizes and good grades and experiences you obtained and all the work experience you've done and all the extracurriculars. If you don't say why it shows that you're the right person to study that subject. So I would say it's not so much the detail, but the reflection that matters. What should you say if you cannot answer a question? I think most important thing is being honest, not guessing. But at the same time, if there's a reason you don't know the answer, these questions aren't usually a direct yes or no questions. They are the questions that are, for example, start as how or why rather than what is this in this picture. Or it would be describe the picture. So as long as you still show your thinking, demonstrate your thinking, and explain why you don't know the answer. So, okay, I've got to this point of solving this problem, but this is where I don't know the answer because I would need more information or something like that. Or if you know what information you would need in that situation, asking the question to the interviewers is how you would answer when you don't know. What are the best supercurricular activities to include in the personal statement? There isn't anything specific. It's, again, anything that applies to the subject you're applying to or the reason why you apply to that subject. I think for medicine, I even mentioned my job in customer service because that I reflected about things like teamwork and helping people and serving people. So as long as you're able to reflect on it and link it to the reason why you want to study the subject and why you're the right and why it makes you the right person to be selected, it's right to include. Could you give an example of an academic questions asked in an interview? So, like I said, it could be things about the reading you've done in the past, things I've seen on YouTube myself. Quite an obvious example, in, for example, science interviews, being given an image of a cell that would be, for example, from under say a picture of a microscope taken with a microscope of a cell and asking you to describe that image. It could be numerical problem as well. So yes, it's hard to think of specific examples here on the spot, but they are usually related to a bigger topic, a whole discussion, rather than just being kind of the interviewer shooting questions at you that have very direct and specific answers. What are the worst, most used phrases in the personal statement? I genuinely don't know if there are any. Obviously, you might have heard different myths about the kind of cliche beginnings. I think, yes, to start with something, I wanted to do medicine since I've been a child or since I've been age 7 can be a bit funny maybe for some people reading those personal statements. It wouldn't be for me because I can genuinely understand why people would want to study medicine since they are children. I think just anything that's honest and isn't exaggerated is a good phrase. The worst ones, yeah, I can't really think of anything that would be so obviously bad. In personal statement, how do you show your passion and link the supercurricular to how it make you want to do the subject? It's all through reflection. Again, I keep repeating myself, and I'm sorry, but this is the main point. If you think you want to mention something like an activity you've done, I don't know, you won a DOV award or something like that, it does need to link to show your reflection that you've thought about your experience and what you've learned from it. And that reflection is the main link. You can link almost anything to your passion and to that subject if you reflect well on it. That's my main advice, I would say. What kind of achievements can you include in your personal statement? So there's different type, generally in terms of content of personal statement, I always say, especially for medicine and also science subjects, there's 2 different paths, and you need to explore both. There's the academic, and then there's the commitment to subject, / work experience kind of path. So any sort of academic achievements such as prizes, scholarships, and it doesn't have to be an achievement as well, just anything again where you've worked above and beyond. If it's been recognized, that's good. But even if so in IB we write extended essays. I don't know, I think in A levels you do like one big work as well that's linked to something. So that would be your kind of academic things you mention, and then your commitment to subject. So in medicine, a lot of it is things like care work, volunteering, working with any sort of vulnerable people. In sciences, I think I mentioned having done some volunteering in a lab, in my school lab, just kind of cleaning the equipment and helping the lab technicians prepare for labs in the week. Yeah, so it doesn't have to be achievements, but if you have any either academic or extracurricular achievements, they can be mentioned, again, if you can link them and reflect on them. What's the best structure? So the structure that always works for me is, and again, there's no perfect structure. Every student I find discovers their own structure. What worked for me 3 times when I applied, I would say, is having an introduction where I briefly explain why I want to study the subject. It can be something original. It can be something like this one experience that kind of pushed the button for you, or just general thoughts about it. Then the second paragraph for me was always reflecting on my academic aptitude. So especially for Oxbridge, it's quite important to show your academic aptitude. So why I'm the academically right person to do it. So that's where I spoke about things beyond my university degree and my school that I've been doing, things like different conferences, research I've done. Third paragraph is the above and beyond paragraph, so things I've done to find out that I definitely want to do this subject. So the kind of volunteering and work I've done with vulnerable people. In science, it would have been, things like lab experience, any sort of research experience, anything related to biomedical science. And then not every time, but sometimes I would include a short paragraph if you still have enough words left on extracurriculars. So things like sports and creative activities, and then having a really brief 1 or 2 sentence conclusion to just close off everything. And that can potentially link back to the first paragraph. So introduction, academic aptitude, above and beyond paragraph, and conclusion. I hope that helps. But again, like I said, there's no specifics. What is good personal statement like? That's a really, really wide question to answer. I really hope you can collect all the things I've said already about both structure, reflection, content, and you can think about what I spoke about in this presentation already. Good, super. Make you stand on for med application. For medicine application, you do need, it is quite recommended that you have some work experience, and that can be, so I'm speaking, honestly, I'm speaking in Cambridge language. They use, in open days, they say the words of working with vulnerable people. So it doesn't mean it has to be working with patients. It can be anything that can be classed as vulnerable. So things like any sort of volunteering or paid work experience in care homes, even things like work with children, work with patients in the hospitals, working with and volunteering with disabled people. So yeah, so that can be both voluntary and paid. So if you can have a part-time job, for example, or if you can in your free time volunteer in an NHS hospital, these are really good activities. Again, it's important to reflect on them. You can't just write down that you've done it and that will stand out. What will stand out is what you've learned from those extracurriculars. Does everyone get an interview? No. Only, I think, I don't know the numbers exactly of people getting the interviews. I know that for graduate medicine, less than half the people who applied got the interviews. I think in other subjects, there's a bit more. But it's, first of all, people who don't meet the minimum requirements might not get an interview. So if you apply with predicted grades that are lower than the minimum entry requirements, those applications often get filtered out straight away. And so I, for example, applied for Oxford medicine, graduate entry medicine, the first time I applied, and I didn't get an interview because my BMAT score was really low. Again, there's no cutoff as to what scores you need to get usually, but it was so low that I was probably way beyond the amount of people they could interview that year. So yeah, it depends again on many factors, but not everyone gets an interview. How do I show that I'm being reflective? Well, there's many different ways to reflect on things. I think one of the things is to be concise, so you can have different experiences that maybe have similar reflections, but you can talk about different things for each experience. So you can talk about, I don't know, it's certain things like teamwork when describing one of your work experiences, but then talking about resilience in another. So yeah, with 4,000 words, it's hard to be repetitive. Sorry, not 4,000 words, 4,000 characters. It's hard to be repetitive because you have to squeeze in so much. So your reflections are usually brief, concise, and I would say, yeah, you describe the experience you did, you describe what exactly you did, so what your involvement was with it, and then you say what it taught you. And that's the kind of 3-sentence concise way of reflecting on an experience. And then you move on, talk about the next one. Yeah, so I think just the word limit wouldn't let you be repetitive. How long does the interview last in total? Again, depends from subject to subject. Some of them are even carried out throughout a couple of days. Not longer than an hour in total, I would say. It shouldn't be, at least not longer, maybe than an hour and a half. That would be a lot. Like I said, it's either panel or multiple mini interviews. We had, I think, for Cambridge, multiple mini interviews, which had 8 stations of 5 minutes. So that's 40 minutes with a 2-minute rest in between them all. So that was, the whole thing was under an hour. For panel interviews, you might have 2 or 3 interviews of 15, 20 minutes. So again, shouldn't be longer than an hour. What sort of topics should you prepare before the interview? I think specifically in Oxbridge, it's good to do a bit of reading about what's currently happening in that field, because Oxbridge is such an academic environment and so much of world-breaking discoveries are being found in these universities. it's moving at such fast pace. It's good to kind of be aware of current things like inventions or news even in the subject you're applying for. Yeah, so having read about, I don't know, the most recent Nobel Prize winners, any kind of the news science section of the BBC, or even going further and deeper, reading some of the scientific articles and magazines can help you. It doesn't mean it will come up. It just means that you might be able to show that you know that you are interested in the field. So again, personal statement, it's still personal to you. You can write anything in any structure, in any paragraph you want. But I found it the easiest to organize my thoughts in, introduction, academic thoughts, extracurricular, and the motivation, describing thoughts, and then the conclusion. How did you pick between biochemistry and biomedical science? Just a quick one here. Biochemistry, I think it talks very much about molecules and proteins. That's what I knew before I applied. Someone who was studying biochemistry told me biomedical science is a bit more about human and animal body, I would say. So there's a bit an aspect of anatomy, physiology, cell biology, which is a bit further from biochemistry. Yeah, so they're quite different. So I suggest you, if you have questions like that about the difference between different subjects, have a read of what they offer and what their structure is like on the different university websites. Could I ask how many points you got in the IB? That's a bit personal. I think you can find me on LinkedIn. I might be saying it that there. If you were applying for biochemistry to other universities but natural sciences at Cambridge? That's a good question. So a lot of the times students find that they're applying to several different subjects, and that was my case as well. I applied the first time I applied to biomedical sciences in one university, but other universities weren't offering biomedical sciences. You might know that, Cambridge offers natural sciences as a whole, and it doesn't divide the narrower parts of different sciences. I think I applied to biochemistry and biological sciences in other universities. The easiest thing to do, this doesn't apply though to medicine when you're applying to 4 medicine and 1 non-medicine subject. But when you're applying to 5, for example, different sciences that are somehow still related, it's just important maybe not to mention the name of it in personal statement. Or to mention something as generic as possible. So something that like natural sciences is a very generic name. So then you can say that's why I'm interested in natural sciences. But I think it's possible to write a personal statement without mentioning the subject at all. Just talking about what interests you and the kind of area of the subject rather than the specific course name that you're applying to. If you're applying for medicine as 4 subjects and 1 that's non-medicine, write your personal for just medicine. It doesn't matter because that's more important to get into. And usually your 5th subject will be okay with that because they would understand that they're the 5th subject besides your 4 medicine choices. So I really hope I answered this here. That you just don't mention the course name and try to find maybe as generic name for the things you're applying for as possible, something that links them all together. Obviously, if you're applying to accounting, biochemistry, engineering, veterinary sciences, and psychology, that's a bit harder and might be impossible. Yeah, so that only applies if the subjects are slightly different. How to find work experience and volunteer. I think that's covered in other talks by Medic Mind and Oxbridge Mind. I'm not sure if that's within the scope of today's talk. I would suggest also pop onto the Medic Mind and Oxbridge Mind websites, and there might be some information about that already and potentially links to other talks about that. How is the workload? If you mean in Oxbridge, it's a lot. It's very hard. That's why it's very important to know what you're going into and apply not just for the aspect of competition and reaching for the stars, but with understanding that the workload is quite heavy. If I had to give a very practical comparison and example, when I was studying biomedical sciences in Edinburgh, I was able to still do a part-time job for about 20 hours a week. In Cambridge, I couldn't even imagine that because the workload is so much higher, and Cambridge doesn't allow you to have a part-time job unless it's related, unless it's kind of based in your college or university. Yeah, so it's a lot of work, and you're aware of it. It's also a lot of holidays. Oxbridge has really long holidays, so it's good to have a look online at what the course year-to-year structure looks like, because it's a bit of a work hard, play hard kind of environment where you do have a lot of hard work during term time, but then you have long holidays to catch up both on work and on the rest. And then I know a lot of people who have graduated, who have gone through an Oxbridge degree, and they did it with pleasure because the work they were doing was worth doing, because they enjoyed it so much. And it same applies to me. And that's how I got through my 4 years. What do you include in good personal safety? Again, I hope that's been covered more or less throughout the whole talk. Which books do you suggest for med interviews? Right, so if you Google Oxford medicine pre-reading, Oxford website has a very good list, and most of the books that I would suggest come from that list, to be honest. There's a very good list both of realistic, both things like fiction, autobiographies, also textbooks. Don't read textbooks. I wouldn't suggest reading any sort of textbooks to prepare for medical interviews, but things like there's a book called Also Human. I don't remember who the author is, but they give you a very good realistic insight into what medicine is as a career. Books by author Atul Gawande are very good as well. So that Oxford medicine pre-reading list has a very nice list of books. And again, it's not compulsory. It's not expected. It's just something, if you're really, really interested in medicine, to spend your time on as well, if you're enjoying reading as well. So I think we have 5 minutes. I'm quickly going to go through as many questions as I can before we finish. Can you apply to Oxbridge for 2 different courses? I don't think you can. I think you can only apply to one, either Oxford or Cambridge, and one course only. And I know I mentioned I applied to Oxford and Cambridge once, but that was for graduate medicine. That's the only exception where you can apply for both. In what way was your personal statement better the second time in the interview answers? So just quickly, my personal statement, it hasn't changed much. The only thing that changed was that for the year that I was applying the second time, I had a job lined up as a healthcare assistant in theaters and recovery in the hospital. So I was able to say that I haven't even started the job before I submitted this personal statement. I just had the job lined up. So that's why I said, this is what I'm going to do this year. And this is what I'm hoping to get from it as a preparation to study medicine. So that was, I think, the only change in my personal statement. And in the interviews, I just prepared much better. That's what I would say. I spent much more time practicing with friends and people of authority, like my lecturers, my tutors, preparing for the interviews. I think the first time I just kind of went in hoping to just be myself and without preparing much and without practicing. Do you think only medical work experience is worth mentioning in personal statement? No, again, anything that with your reflections you can link to why you want to study the subject. I can't think of a specific example I've used, but like I said, even things like customer service job for me did show why I wanted to study medicine. And I was volunteering with disabled people, which I linked to my biomedical science applications, and I think both medicine as well. So it doesn't have to directly link to that subject as long as you're able to reflect upon it. I've seen some very good personal statements, especially in the COVID generation, with students who haven't had the chance to go into hospitals and care homes to work because the numbers of people was so limited at a time. They were still able to write really good personal statements from just other things they did, as long as they reflected on them. How did I find biomedical science? It's really, really interesting, good degree. Again, it's a bit more specific than the Oxbridge kind of natural sciences. I think even I think Oxford, you can do things like biology, and then Cambridge, you could do natural sciences, which would be the closest to biomedical sciences. But then you later in your degree narrow down enough to make it as similar to what you wanted to look like as possible. Biomedical sciences was, very interesting and fun degree. A lot of essays and research. Can you apply for more than one course in the same university? I think, if I'm not entirely mistaken, you can, as long as it's not in Oxbridge. The only thing I would say that some of the courses, you need to do your research with individual universities and email them and ask them if you're not sure. But some of the universities accept students as the same cohort for several different courses. So for example, in Edinburgh, we had biomedical sciences that you could divide into infectious diseases, neuroscience, reproductive science, something else, which all sounds like different degrees when you read the name, but when you read the description, they all do the same thing in the first 2 years of the course. So the cohort accepted is the same. So if you apply to biomedical, to Edinburgh for example, neurosciences and infectious diseases, it's actually the same degree at the start, or at least it's the same cohort that's accepted together. And only later you get to then pick which branch you still want to go to, or you can change that. So I applied for just biomedical sciences, but I graduated in biomedical sciences and infectious diseases. And people I started with and I was in the same cohort with did things like natural sciences, neuroscience, and other things. So I think it's 8 p.m. I'm going to stop here now and stop sharing. Thank you so much, everyone, for participating. I think you might be able, you will be receiving any extra information. I just wanted to see if the moderators of the talk wanted to add anything. Probably not. Okay, so thank you very much, everyone, for participating. If you have any questions, contact Medic Mind or Oxbridge Mind, and you might be able to, I think, receive the recording of the session as well. So thank you very much.